The ways of your kind are ones of violence.
Hello everyone, I apologise for the delay in uploads. I've almost finished fixing up the new house and have also been working on a bit of a deep dive alien theory video, displayed here on screen, which will be coming your way very soon, I promise. However, to the task at hand. Predator Badlands is finally out, and boy did it feel good to be back at the cinema, as it always brings out that childlike sense of wonder and excitement that never seems to diminish whenever I go. Unless you check out the price of concession food these days, ouch. Now, I would just say this, as the Predator films were important to me growing up. I think that I had already formed an opinion about this film going in, based on a few facts. Firstly, it does have a 12 rating in the UK and a PG rating in the US, which is the safest rating a Predator film has ever received, which means it has ultimately been designed to attract as large an audience as possible, under the corporate influence of Disney's let's just exploit classic franchises and make as much money as possible approach. Additionally, with the bold new formula change up from antagonist to protagonist, I knew that we would undoubtedly lose much of the mystique and appeal that had been given to the Yautja species in the first two films especially. I had just assumed that Badlands was going to be a couple of hours of familiar modern-day action-based entertainment, maybe annoyingly loud in parts, fast-paced, and a little tiresome on the eyes. A semi-forgettable experience that wasn't going to make me think too much and would have far too many cheesy moments to take as seriously as I might prefer. I was also dreading any scenes involving the Alien universe crossover, as I admire both IP's multitude of differences and sci-fi nuances too much to understand that once you merge them, they begin to lose some of their individual identity that makes them so uniquely important and special, which means everything to us fans to have the chance to enjoy these separate stories. Lastly, Deck's appearance remained a significant concern, as I had no idea how far they had humanised this underdeveloped juvenile Yautja, in terms of his emotional expression, movement, and hearing him speak their language for the first time on screen, other than through echolocation clicks and grunts. A lot of risks were taken here, but truthfully the franchise needed something new at this point, as I could never have stomached another The Predator from 2018. Which Trachtenberg's Prey wisely steered away from in 2022, saving the series from yet another predictable disaster. Thankfully, with Badlands, I'm very happy to say that most of these issues I just expressed are left behind, right from the opening scenes. The film immediately establishes a dark, serious tone on Yautja Prime, the homeworld of this species, where the indigenous clans show zero tolerance for weakness of any kind, mental or physical. Props to Trachtenberg for many reasons here, but it truly felt like he stayed loyal to the Predator lore and did justice to their warrior ethos and brutal nobility among other intelligent species. We get a harsh glimpse of that culture right from the start when a father appears ready to sacrifice both of his sons, if it means preserving the clan's honour and dignity, an act fully consistent with their code. Surprisingly, I was very impressed with the opening fight scenes between Deck and his brother in the cave system. It reminded me somewhat of why I go to see a Predator film at the cinema, much in the same way I got chills seeing the Spartans clang their shields before battle in Snyder's 300, or the way as a child I aspired to be like the macho private military company in the original Predator film. It all felt incredibly testosterone-filled, viscerally physical, and unflinchingly violent. In fact, throughout the picture there is undoubtedly an over-the-top nature to most of the action shots, much in the same way that the Transformers films initially caught our attention and then filled us with fatigue with their endless and repetitive CG porn that just became boring in the end. The difference here is that all of the cinematography, smart camera angles, and thoughtful creativity lend the fighting and action a great deal of elegance and finesse, setting it slightly aside from other action-orientated films, rather than focusing on it being an action thriller, which is what we are more accustomed to in this franchise. Of course, in comparison to the horror mood of the original, it will never, in my mind, compete with the less is more suspense of do we see it, don't we see it, 1 second it was here but now it's gone, you know, the innovative old school approach done on a budget, that cemented certain films in the horror, thriller and sci-fi Hall of Fame. That said, I was happily impressed and glued to the screen during the numerous combat sequences that were perfectly shot and satisfyingly brutal, if I'm honest. I really felt the impact of every clash, and the savage strength of the Yautja was perfectly showcased. Even though Dek is considered a runt among his people, and the size differences were very notable, he was absolutely formidable in combat, and I became fascinated with his struggle to achieve honour. I would urge seeing this film in a cinema with good audio, as the music had a wonderfully consistent rhythmic tribal ambience that helped bring the story and the vibe to life. The sound effects of all the weapons, gadgets, and alien life were incredibly distinct and felt fresh, as was also the case in Prey with the feral predator. The world was captivating and continually threw out surprises. It was like Pandora but overcrowded and on steroids. What's more, the facial expressions of Dek in combination with his voice, breathing and battle roars were quite harrowing at times and never once looked uncanny or off-putting, thankfully. This aspect was a major worry for me, as I get very anxious when directors change what doesn't need changing. But I'm telling you, when Dek was really emoting, especially in outbursts of sheer rage, not only do you feel his anguish, but I couldn't tell when the practical effects ended and the CG took over. It appeared fairly seamless. It felt like a good 98% of our protagonist, played by Demetrius, was him in a suit, performing to extremely high standards. It's normally the case with unusually tall actors that their height impedes their ability to perform intensely athletic movements. But knowing that Demetrius did almost all of the stunts himself, it's easy to understand how this pays off for the film. I would say that very early on into the movie, I'd already forgotten what I'd previously found off-putting about the head design, because I was so captivated by the lifelike appearance of Dek's face, whether it be his sunken yet piercing eyes or the vibrant texture to his skin. He just came alive in the micro movements. I particularly loved the way they were able to animate the motion of both inner and outer layer sets of teeth, as it is clear that all of these quality of life improvements have come a long way with practical effects. Most of all, it was definitely the physical performance of Demetrius that impressed me more than anything, as we've never seen a predator move in such a graceful yet powerfully fast manner, which reflects the musculature and athleticism of the species as accurately as I've ever seen in live action. The cinematography looked as fantastic as one might hope for a rich alien world, much of which was filmed in New Zealand when it wasn't the CG vistas of Yautja Prime, which also looked incredibly vivid with its breathtaking establishing shots. However, the death planet named Genna was strikingly brought to life with wondrous landscapes and lethal terrain, home to a shockingly diverse array of deadly flora and fauna, where even the grass is made out of razor-sharp glass, and every multicelled organism wants to kill one another. Great. Although I enjoyed the unlikely relationship between Dek and the Weyland-Yutani synthetic named Thea, played by Ellie Fanning, and the adventure fraught with many setbacks that they embark on, I can understand why some of these aspects might frustrate some of the Predator purists, who prefer their films a little more mature in areas of horror and suspense, especially when the duo become a trio with the introduction of a cute cuddly infant Kalisk. This little creature, who later becomes a pivotal reveal for the main characters, ends up swaying Dek from his main goal of killing and returning home with a trophy of the parent Kalisk, in hopes of earning honour with his clan, in favour of teaming up against the Weyland Corporation and its army of androids. Badlands also takes a few extra liberties in the form of interspecies team-ups that I feel drew some inspiration from Apocalypto when Jaguar Paw used his environment to defeat his pursuers. Here, we see Dek fully replace his armour and gear with living parts equally as deadly as Yautja technology. Some may view this as lazy convenience that in some capacity does reflect what is usually consumed within the family fun category of films, and Badlands has been aimed at that target audience to some degree by its age certificate. To be honest though, they got the important things done well enough that most of the minor tropes didn't bother me. The comedic interactions here and there among the trio do suggest a need to appease a wide range of consumers, but there are just far too many damn good components to Badlands that place it miles above previous installments, with the exception of Prey, that is, which shares a lot of DNA with Badlands. Before I talk about the integration of alien narrative elements in what is now a shared universe, at least within Dan Trachtenberg's soon-to-be trilogy, with Badlands being the second film, I just want to cover some other things that stood out. After watching his fantastic anime Killer of Killers released earlier this year, It was strongly evident that he enjoys playing around with connective tissue and cliffhangers. With 3 solid Predator films already in the bag, and at least one more on its way, we can most likely expect a continuation and perhaps a conclusion to some of these narratives. Therefore, I believe he is far from done. The clues and Easter eggs are there, and I'm sorry to say that after only one viewing, it's impossible to list them all just yet. However, one that I did notice was near the start and involved Naru from Prey. When Dek chooses his world on the holographic display, I guess Earth appears because we see her emerge as the victor of humanity against a Yautja. I'm not sure what happened to Danny Glover's character, but as we saw in Killers, the Yautja abduct and freeze these champions, keeping them in storage. Which, by the way, is another interesting concept that has endless sequel possibilities, so maybe he's there too, chilling out. In any case, it was an intriguing way to keep things open. I was also delighted to have my negative expectations of the spoken Yautja language shattered completely. It was a language crafted especially for the film and worked amazingly well. I felt that the reason it worked so well was because this species doesn't have lips, they're all teeth and then some. In all the other films, we merely hear them grunt and roar, and therefore the language seems to have been designed around this concept. The extremely guttural form of communication all comes from the throat and chest and is articulated well enough to be believable as an actual language. It all sounds primal and embodies all the traits we associate with the galaxy's most formidable hunters. The decision to showcase much of the Predator's iconic weaponry and tools, with some new additions but then, due to the plot, never allowing Dek to use them, was wise, offering us an insight into the martial prowess, survival instincts and intelligence of his kind, as well as their lifelong training. That being said, as this story is based on Dek's rite of passage, it also serves as an interesting prologue to how a Yautja earns each of the fundamental tools required to survive any hunt. In this case, it was the infamous cloaking device, as well as restored honour that Dek sought, which in the end he finds, but not in the way he initially desired. The story wasn't particularly unique on its own, but it was enthralling because it was rooted in Yautja lore and their cold, societal values which added a certain intensity to the hunt and the hunted. A role reversal for Dek that occurred more times than a game of spin the bottle on this deadly planet. What's more, there was very much an evolution of principles with our lead in Yautja, because we see him develop a broader understanding of what it means to be the strongest from Thea's definition of an alpha wolf, which later sees him transform into a protector just as much as a fierce killer. I found the personality of the synthetic Thea a little annoying at first, but she quickly grew on me as the bond between herself and Dek became stronger. Especially with the emergence of Tessa, Thea's synthetic twin, who in Thea's naivete betrays her in service to the AI overlord, whom we will know as Mother. We should probably talk about that now, because correct me if I'm wrong, but was the implication here that Mother, the onboard AI interface seen in many of the Alien films, is no longer simply a tool for communication and ship welfare, but quite possibly a governing presence within this infamous corporation known as Weyland-Yutani? Not to get too caught up in commentary on real-world events, but it always struck me how, in the Alien films, the ship's AI system, which on some level is a villain in as much as it adheres to the soulless company's prerogatives, could also have been, but never proved to be, in control all along. I don't know if that is being implied in Badlands, or whether the reason why the synthetic sister's future depends entirely on this result-based relationship with Mother may just be because this AI has grown into a network-based command system that controls only the synthetic side of research and New World colony establishment. Either way, the primary company goal was to retrieve the large and ferocious specimen known as the Callisk, due to its extraordinary regenerative properties. I don't see any of this as a great revelation for Alien fans, other than it's just the company up to its old tricks, seeking biological specimens for its R&D department. However, the level of authority that the AI presents is intriguing enough to entice me to revisit my interpretation of its role in the Alien films. I like the vagueness of it, and all I'll say is I'm just happy that a xenomorph didn't appear in the film. Although I'm sure it might have been treated with a lot more respect than it was given in Alien Earth. Would you not agree? I don't know about you guys, but I thoroughly enjoyed Badlands. It was a hell of a ride and a great cinematic experience for me. It was a tight film with no empty filler and featured some clever and well thought out predator-prey scenarios that exposed the planet's detailed ecosystem and highlighted evolution at its most adaptive. As the last act plays out, sure, it had some moments of kaiju smashing that would have become boring if it had run longer, and the clone army of synthetic cannon fodder only served as further creative killing spree for Deck and his two sidekicks, but the ending didn't leave me disappointed at all. Deck predictably kills his father, albeit in glorious fashion, and then we learn of a new and perhaps more dangerous antagonist, that is, his mother. That word keeps returning. This suggests that perhaps in the sequel we may learn about the role of females in the Yautja species, and the threat they pose within their society, especially if they hold power, as appears to be the case when considering the imposing convoy bearing down on our heroes. The future could be bright, judging from the way Badlands and Killer of Killers end, as well as their solid kickoff to a Predator franchise revival. It didn't have any horror elements, but it thrived in an action and adventure context well enough. I'm definitely considering a second trip to watch again, but I'll undoubtedly return with another video once I've rewatched and have uncovered more of its secrets and hidden meaning. Please let me know your thoughts, and thank you for tuning in. Take care, guys.